Fear was the currency of the city, and Vincenzo Moretti was its merciless issuer. The name alone, Vincenzo Moretti, was a whisper of absolute, chilling power, designating the most ruthless mafia boss still drawing breath. Yet, this architect of empires and terror found himself utterly defeated by a single unyielding fact. His own daughter, Isabella, his precious little girl, had been born sightless, confined to an impenetrable darkness. The pronouncements were final, delivered by the world's most expensive medical minds. The condition was permanent, irreversible. Specialists were flown in from every continent, commanding fortunes just to confirm the cold reality. "There is no cure," they echoed, their words hollow against the walls of his wealth. Vincenzo Moretti, the man who could dismantle rival dynasties with a nod, was left impotent, unable to grant his child the simple gift of light. His helplessness persisted until the morning the new maid stepped across his threshold. She was Elena Rosi, a figure of quiet shadows, soft-spoken to the point of being easily overlooked, almost invisible amidst the grandeur of the Moretti estate. No one, least of all the preoccupied security detail or the polished staff, spared her a second thought. But Elena possessed an instinct forged by hardship, an ability to see what was deliberately hidden. One crucial morning, while Isabella was playing, the realization struck her. The little girl reached for a specific, brightly colored toy and turned her head toward the faint clatter of a dropped spoon. The movement was too precise, too centered, too unervingly accurate, as though she wasn't locating a sound but tracking a visual coordinate. Elena froze, a chill running down her spine despite the heating of the vast room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knelt quickly beside the child, her touch feather-light, and gently guided Isabella's face upward, bathing her eyes in the soft morning light filtering through the expensive drapes. What Elena saw, a fleeting, undeniable micro-adjustment of the pupils, made her inhale a sharp, audible gasp that caused Isabella to instinctively flinch. The truth was seismic. Isabella wasn't blind. Not truly, not fundamentally. She was a victim of a deliberate, calculated imposition of darkness, a betrayal far more sinister and shocking than any congenital defect. The moment Elena Rosi began to chip away at that manufactured reality, the vast, terrifying architecture of the mafia boss's world, his carefully guarded power, the precarious truce with his enemies, and even the presumed loyalty of his own household, began a slow, irreversible collapse. Stay with me, because what this unassuming maid uncovered within the insulated walls of the Moretti mansion will utterly redefine your understanding of this dangerous family. Before we dive into the heart of the story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more content, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, the story begins. Vincenzo Moretti had not inherited his empire. He had seized it. Every inch of territory was paid for in blood, secured by cold-hearted betrayal, and governed by a calculated surgical violence. By the age of 45, his grip controlled nearly 50% of the city's clandestine operations, the ports, the illicit trade, the financial flows. Elected officials paled when his name was uttered in closed-door meetings. Rival families, once formidable dynasties, simply ceased to exist after crossing him. Their mansions shuttered, their members vanished into the cold earth. His decree was absolute law, extending his chilling reach far beyond the grimy shadows where lesser criminals lurked, projecting power into the highest levels of society. Such absolute dominance demanded an equally staggering toll. 3 meticulously planned assassination attempts in the last 24 months had cemented his understanding of the world. Enemies were now perpetual, circling his perimeter like famished vultures. Trust was not merely a luxury. It was a lethal vulnerability he could never indulge in. Paranoia was no longer a weakness but a sharpened, necessary instinct, his closest, most dependable companion. The architectural fortress he inhabited, complete with reinforced walls and advanced surveillance, became taller, colder, and more isolated with every ticking year. Then came Isabella. The very moment Vincenzo's immense, calloused hands cradled his infant daughter, a seismic change occurred in the core of the untouchable boss. This tiny, vulnerable life was a mirror reflecting back everything he had systematically eradicated from his existence. Genuine innocence, fragile hope, the absolute purity of unconditional love. For the first time since his youth, the hardened, brutalized criminal felt a profound, terrifying vulnerability. The terror wasn't physical. It was existential. But this moment of grace was brutally short-lived. Days later, the clinical verdict was delivered. Isabella exhibited zero response to light, no ability to track motion, no discernible visual awareness. Test after test returned the same grim certainty, total congenital blindness. Adding unbearable tragedy to the darkness, his beloved wife, Maria, had succumbed to complications during the delivery. A fatal issue that even his limitless resources could not avert. The man who dictated life and death across half the city was now utterly helpless, facing a fate he couldn't bribe, threaten, or eliminate. He plunged millions into a desperate, global quest for a remedy. Private jets, fitted with pediatric medical bays, became common transport, ferrying Isabella and her entourage to consult with the foremost specialists in Zurich, London, and Kyoto. Experimental gene therapies, cutting-edge stem cell procedures, and revolutionary neurostimulation were attempted. No cost was too exorbitant, no risk too great if it promised the slightest flicker of light for his daughter. Yet, every single consultation concluded identically. Respectful, apologetic doctors confirmed the bleak, unalterable truth. Isabella's optic nerves were fundamentally malformed. The damage was embryonic and irreversible. They concluded that no surgery, no pharmaceutical intervention, and certainly no miracle could restore vision that had never properly developed in the womb. Vincenzo retreated even further behind the impregnable defenses of his estate. He consolidated his organization's operations there, issuing commands from a vast study reinforced with bulletproof glass and thick concrete. Isabella became the absolute center of his existence, the solitary island of purity in a sea of corruption and calculated violence. Every evening, he performed a sacred ritual, reading aloud to her, his voice a low, rough rumble. He meticulously described the saturation of crimson, the cool depth of sapphire, painting vivid, heartbreaking pictures of a vibrant world forever concealed from her. The architecture of the mansion mirrored his internal conflict. The public sections were dazzling displays of intimidating wealth. Polished marble, enormous crystal chandeliers, and Renaissance masterpieces, designed to impress and warn his visitors and associates. Isabella's private wing, however, was a sanctuary of calculated care. Deep pile carpets silenced every footstep. Furniture corners were rounded and padded to eliminate any sharp danger. Walls were covered in diverse textures, providing necessary tactile markers for spatial orientation. Every aspect was deliberately engineered to safely guide a child through perpetual darkness. The household staff moved like ghosts, trained to speak in near whispers around Isabella and execute their duties with precise, quiet deliberation to prevent startling her hypersensitive hearing. They witnessed the transformation. The crime boss's massive, intimidating hands became silken with tenderness as he helped her navigate the house, fed her, and dressed her. Yet, beneath the veneer of the devoted father, the same merciless predator remained. The business of empire continued unabated. Deals worth millions were sealed, and enemies still dissolved into non-existence. The duality was jarring, almost schizophrenic. A tender moment reading a fairy tale might be abruptly sliced through by a secure line phone call demanding an immediate execution. Family dinners were followed instantly by intense strategy sessions, where the logistics of million-dollar drug shipments were discussed with the casual detachment of ordering groceries. As Isabella transitioned from infant to a fragile toddler, certain troubling developmental patterns solidified. Her reliance on auditory and tactile input was absolute. The world was structured purely by sound and texture. Her developmental milestones consistently trailed those of sighted children her age. Tasks that should have quickly become routine remained agonizing, daily struggles. Vincenzo employed the absolute elite of childcare professionals. Nannies with impeccable, globally sourced credentials, years of experience with complex special needs, and recommendations from royal families. But the turnover was relentless. None lasted more than a few months. Some cited the palpable, ever-present danger of the environment. Others lacked the specific patience required for Isabella's complex disabilities. And a chilling handful simply vanished, their departure silent and unexplained. Whispers among the remaining staff suggested these disappearances were due to secrets seen or overheard, making their continued presence a liability. The constant rotation of caregivers was an immense source of frustration for Vincenzo. Isabella desperately required consistency and stability. But trustworthy help was a near impossibility when your primary residence also functioned as the nerve center of a criminal empire, and your most trusted associates strapped firearms to their hips with the same thoughtlessness others reserved for grabbing their car keys. Dr. Castellano, Isabella's primary pediatric physician, conducted monthly visits. His duty was to track her progression and carefully fine-tune the complex cocktail of medications intended to mitigate the seizure activity sometimes associated with profound blindness. Castellano was one of the minuscule few Vincenzo granted total, unreserved trust. This reliance stemmed partly from the doctor having delivered Isabella and having been a witness to Maria's tragic final moments. Primarily, however, it was secured by financial arrangement. Vincenzo paid a price ensuring absolute, unbreakable loyalty and discretion. During these rigorous examinations, Dr. Castellano meticulously tested reflexes, assessed sensory responses, and documented her cognitive development. The findings never varied. Zero measurable change in visual function, total dependency on tactile and auditory senses, adequate physical growth, but measurable lags in cognitive milestones. Vincenzo accepted these reports as absolute gospel. Dr. Castellano had served the Moretti family for decades. His professional reputation was spotless, his dedication seemingly beyond reproach. If he decreed that Isabella's blindness was a permanent, irreversible physiological fact, then it was a medical certainty. The entire clockwork rhythm of the estate was dictated by Isabella's needs. 8 a.m. was breakfast, followed by a dedicated physical therapy session aimed at improving coordination and spatial mapping. Mornings, weather permitting, were spent in the expansive, carefully manicured garden, where Isabella explored various plant textures and smells under the watchful eye of a security detail. Afternoons were reserved for music, a field where she displayed exceptional, prodigious talent. Her hearing was impossibly acute, her ability to memorize and replicate complex melodies extraordinary. The evenings, however, were sacred to Vincenzo. All business paused. He devoted uninterrupted hours to his daughter, reading, engaging in simple tactile games, or just holding her until she settled into sleep. These brief, quiet moments were the only genuine tranquility he had ever known. But tranquility is a debt that men like Vincenzo can never fully repay. Rival organizations interpreted his reduced visibility in street operations as vulnerability. Younger, aggressively ambitious criminals began probing his borders, seizing territories that had long been untouchable. Moreover, law enforcement investigations sharpened, fueled by suspicions that his sudden domestic retreat masked a potential negotiation or cooperation with authorities. The mounting pressure for him to resume active, visible leadership was almost unbearable. Phone calls demanding his attention shattered their family time with increasing regularity. Associates appeared at unpredictable hours bearing crises that required immediate, brutal resolution. The fragile equilibrium between the role of protective father and the demands of ruling a vast criminal empire was beginning to fracture dangerously. And then, on a frigid Tuesday morning in mid-November, the established routine irrevocably shifted. The employment agency had delivered yet another applicant, their fourth in 8 weeks. Vincenzo didn't even lower his newspaper as Bruno, his imposing security chief, ushered the woman into the study. Just another qualified disappointment, he presumed. Her name was Elena Rosi. She was 28 years old, and she was fundamentally different from the flawlessly groomed, specialized professionals who had preceded her. Elena was desperate. She had recently lost her job at a major downtown hotel, closed without warning, leaving her scrambling against looming eviction notices and dwindling savings. The agency had issued grim warnings about the Moretti household. The unusual demands, the profound circumstances, the infamous staff turnover. But the compensation was triple her highest previous wage, and desperation eliminated all hesitation. Unlike the former candidates, Elena possessed no impressive university degrees or glossy references. She hailed from the city's harshest, poorest neighborhood, raised by a formidable grandmother who spent her life scrubbing the floors of the very wealthy. Elena had absorbed vital lessons early. Survival depended on noticing the microdetails others ignored, remaining silent when the powerful spoke, and rendering oneself useful without being noticed. Her interview with Vincenzo lasted precisely 7 minutes. She sat opposite his massive, fortress-like oak desk, her hands folded calmly in her lap, answering his clipped questions with uncomplicated honesty. She offered no grandiose pledges of revolutionary educational methodologies. She was simply a quiet woman requiring employment, acutely aware that some houses operated by their own unique, unspoken rules. It wasn't her sparse resume that arrested Vincenzo's attention. It was her instantaneous, intuitive response when Isabella, drawn by the new presence, hesitantly wandered into the study. Most previous candidates had exhibited visible discomfort, stiffening their postures, unsure how to address a child defined by a sensory deficit. A few had immediately launched into forced, overly enthusiastic bursts of baby talk and exaggerated gestures, causing Isabella to recoil instantly. Elena did the opposite. She remained perfectly immobile, a statue of quiet acceptance, allowing Isabella to explore at her own speed. When the child's tentative fingers finally brushed the leather of Elena's simple shoes, Elena spoke, her voice a low, steady murmur. She quietly introduced herself and described her simple cotton dress and shoes in factual, gentle terms. There was no saccharine cheerfulness, no theatricality, just a calm, solid acknowledgement of the child's existence. Isabella lingered, her small, seeking hand coming to rest lightly against Elena's knee, a gesture of trust she rarely extended. That single, unguarded moment of connection was the deciding factor. Vincenzo terminated the interview, his decision made. Elena was hired immediately. Elena's first shift commenced well before dawn. She arrived at the high gate just as armored delivery vehicles were offloading the weekly provisions. Bouquets of exotic flowers, imported gourmet groceries, and crates of vintage Bordeaux reserved for business associates. The jarring, almost obscene contrast between this calculated opulence and the cramped, silent desperation of her own apartment was immediate, but Elena ruthlessly suppressed any outward reaction. Mrs. Benedetti, the stern, immaculate head of household, conducted a brisk tour of Isabella's wing. Room after room was a testament to customized care. Acoustically dampened walls, padded surfaces, clear navigational pathways, and ergonomically specialized furniture. It was the physical manifestation of a father's desperate love and unlimited financial resources attempting to purchase a cure medical science had denied. Elena's own quarters were small but impeccably maintained, nestled in a remote corner of the staff wing with a quiet view of the walled garden. Mrs. Benedetti recited the house rules with military precision. Isabella's schedule was sacrosanct. Any disruption was grounds for immediate dismissal. Furthermore, certain operational areas of the mansion were strictly off-limits, particularly during business hours. The underlying instruction was chillingly clear. Focus exclusively on the child. See nothing else. Isabella's daily routine was rigid, an unbending matrix of activities. Morning medications were administered precisely at 7:30 a.m. by Mrs. Benedetti, strictly according to Dr. Castellano's detailed instructions. Breakfast was served at 8, followed by carefully structured physical exercises. Mornings were filled with specialized activities, tactile learning, music sessions, and adapted educational tasks. During her first week, Elena employed her innate observational skills, noting subtle patterns the professional nannies had overlooked. Isabella showed a marked responsiveness to certain vocal frequencies. She appeared distinctly more engaged and alert during specific late-morning periods. These preferences were too consistent to be random. They pointed toward a heightened level of non-visual environmental awareness that deeply intrigued Elena. The medication protocol was especially noteworthy. 3 separate prescriptions, administered at perfectly timed intervals throughout the day. Dr. Castellano, during his briefing, had outlined their necessity: seizure prophylaxis, cognitive augmentation, and overall neurological stabilization for children with Isabella's specific condition. Elena outwardly accepted this medical explanation. Yet, the intense complexity and rigid adherence to the three-part pharmaceutical ritual seemed disproportionate for a 4-year-old child. Watching Vincenzo interact with Isabella revealed the immense chasm between the boss and the father. Every evening, the figure who inspired crippling fear across the city transformed into a gentle behemoth, his voice softening to an almost lyrical whisper as he read bedtime stories about imaginary kingdoms and adventures. But during these profoundly tender scenes, Elena observed a critical detail. Isabella's entire demeanor was muted, almost chemically sedated. The flashes of sharp curiosity and alertness she exhibited during the morning hours steadily dissolved as the day advanced. By evening, the child was docile, perfectly compliant, but profoundly absent, physically present, yet entirely disconnected from the sensory world around her. This troubling pattern defied easy explanation. While children with severe conditions often suffered fatigue due to the enormous effort required to function, the regularity and severity of Isabella's progressive deterioration felt fundamentally unnatural. Elena's hard-won background had been her greatest teacher, training her to perceive the unsaid and the unseen. Poverty demanded acute survival instincts. Recognizing the telltale signs of deception, sensing the latent hostility beneath superficially polite exchanges, and knowing that immense wealth invariably shielded dark, meticulous secrets. These honed skills, vital for surviving dangerous streets and unstable employment, now pulsed with intuitive warnings she struggled to intellectualize. The mansion's immense staff functioned with the mechanical precision of a military corps. Yet, Elena sensed a deep, shared undercurrent of fear beneath their professional masks. Conversations instantly ceased when she approached. Subtle, charged glances were exchanged when they believed her attention was elsewhere. It was clear. The entire household was privy to a hidden truth, and their meticulously neutral expressions signaled that this knowledge was profoundly unpleasant, possibly terrifying. Vincenzo's business partners were constant visitors. Men in exquisitely tailored suits with the cold, dead eyes of career predators. Their presence injected a suffocating tension that stood in stark opposition to the carefully cultivated tranquility of Isabella's wing. Elena quickly learned the vital necessity of becoming an absolute fixture. Curiosity regarding the Moretti organization was an express ticket to extreme danger. Yet, she registered how Isabella seemed preternaturally aware of these tense visits, growing unusually withdrawn and passive on days when the house was crowded with menacing strangers. 3 weeks into her employment, Elena achieved the first genuine breakthrough. During their dedicated afternoon music session, Elena quietly began humming an uncomplicated melody as Isabella manipulated her tactile blocks. The little girl immediately ceased her activity, tilting her head with an intense, focused attention Elena had never witnessed. Encouraged, Elena continued the humming, gently weaving simple words into a song about the concepts of color and shape. Isabella didn't merely listen. She began rhythmically moving her small hands, swaying her body slightly, as if the music had resonated with a profound, latent part of her consciousness. For that beautiful moment, Isabella seemed wholly present, fully alive, and truly engaged with the world. That evening, Elena recounted the incident to Vincenzo during their routine debriefing. His response was immediate, raw, and intense. A lightning flash of desperate hope that momentarily stripped away his hardened facade. He grilled Elena relentlessly, demanding meticulous detail. What had she sung? How precisely had Isabella moved? Could the response be replicated? Elena did repeat the song the next day, and again Isabella responded with electrifying focus. But as the afternoon wore on, and the clock ticked closer to the scheduled medication time, that bright, new alertness began its slow, inevitable retreat. By the time Vincenzo arrived for his bedtime ritual, Isabella had reverted entirely to her passive, disconnected state, leaving Elena with a deeper, more troubling set of unanswered questions. The discovery made through music irrevocably deepened their relationship. Isabella started seeking Elena out constantly, reaching for her hand, leaning against her arm during story time, seeking physical comfort that transcended the basic needs of a caregiver. For Elena, whose own youth had been defined by harsh neglect and emotional absence, these small gestures of unconditional trust were everything. She was wholly unprepared for the pure, unadulterated affection a child could offer. Isabella's reliance on her activated a fierce, protective instinct Elena hadn't known she possessed. Yet, with this burgeoning attachment came an unbearable anxiety. The longer Elena observed Isabella, the stronger her conviction became. Something deeply malignant was concealed within the child's supposed treatment. The relentless schedule, the complex pharmacology, the daily ritualistic disappearance of Isabella's personality. It all felt profoundly wrong. Elena began scrutinizing Dr. Castellano's monthly checkups with forensic focus. She observed his interactions, noting the clinical coldness behind his detailed inquiries about Isabella's behavior. His professional manner felt strangely distant, less like a compassionate pediatrician and more like a researcher methodically documenting a specimen. The pharmaceuticals he supplied were always delivered sealed, bearing intimidating labels of complex, opaque medical jargon. Mrs. Benedetti, the fortress gatekeeper, handled these drugs with meticulous reverence, measuring each dose with scientific precision and logging every administration time in a leather-bound book locked securely within her desk. Elena's amorphous suspicions suddenly crystallized into solid form one afternoon. While hastily clearing the breakfast table, she accidentally jostled the tray, sending Isabella's morning medication vial tumbling. The liquid splashed onto the cool marble countertop. As Elena frantically wiped the expensive surface clean, a sharp, distinct chemical odor hit her. A smell both jarringly misplaced and disturbingly familiar. It evoked a vague, unsettling memory from her impoverished youth. Her grandmother's hushed warnings about the truly wealthy stories of powerful families who employed specific, dark substances to render inconvenient or troublesome relatives perpetually compliant and quiet. The recollection was spectral, yet the seed of doubt it planted rapidly took root, hardening into a terrifying certainty. That evening, watching Isabella sink into her usual, profound nighttime stupor, a drastic regression following an afternoon of genuine engagement, Elena made a life-altering decision. Starting tomorrow, she would initiate a rigorous, secret watch over the precise compounds being ingested by Isabella's small body 3 times a day. Elena knew too well that when the enormously powerful sought to conceal a truth, they spared no effort to ensure success. But she also knew a fundamental rule of survival. Secrets, no matter how carefully buried, always left microscopic traces for those brave, or desperate, enough to search for them. Elena's covert investigation commenced with meticulous observation. She started arriving 15 minutes earlier each morning, mapping the house's pre-dawn rhythms. While the staff adhered to routine, the preparation of Isabella's medication stood out as an alarming anomaly. Mrs. Benedetti did not simply dispense a single dose from a pre-mixed bottle. Instead, she engaged in a complex chemical ritual, carefully combining specific, minute quantities from 3 distinct, unlabeled vials into a small, sterile measuring cup. She stirred the combination with intense, scientific concentration for nearly 5 minutes, executing the process as if the smallest deviation could trigger a catastrophe. Elena memorized every detail while pretending to arrange the day's toys. The first vial held a liquid so clear it was indistinguishable from water. The second contained a viscous, nearly syrupy fluid with a subtle, ominous amber hue. The third was completely opaque, thick, and milk-white. When blended, they yielded a uniform, pale yellow mixture that Isabella consumed without protest. The most alarming discovery concerned Dr. Castellano's visits. On examination days, Isabella received an additional, unscheduled dose just minutes before the doctor entered the room. Mrs. Benedetti would briefly excuse herself, returning with a new mixture which Isabella dutifully drank while the doctor initiated his customary questions about her cognitive development. Elena began correlating these administration times with Isabella's alertness levels. The resulting pattern was horrifyingly undeniable. Isabella exhibited her highest levels of focus and responsiveness during the longest intervals between doses, specifically in the late morning, prior to the noon administration. By nightfall, after the third daily dose, the child was not merely passive. She was functionally catatonic. The definitive confirmation arrived during Elena's fourth week. A catastrophic plumbing failure erupted in the kitchen, flooding the main floor and plunging the mansion into utter chaos. Mrs. Benedetti was consumed by coordinating the frantic repair crews and supervising the salvage of priceless artifacts. In the ensuing pandemonium, Isabella's crucial noon medication was inadvertently delayed by almost 2 full hours. In those extended moments of unmedicated clarity, Isabella performed an act that shattered every medical assessment. A small bird landed on the outside sill of the large window. Isabella turned her head, not merely toward the soft chirping sound, but tracked the bird's precise, hopping movement along the ledge. This was not auditory localization. This was visual tracking. Elena's breath hitched, her heart seized in her chest. She moved with agonizing slowness, carefully positioning herself in the child's presumed line of sight. When she tentatively waved her hand, Isabella's gaze subtly, momentarily, locked onto the movement, shifting fractionally to follow the arc of Elena's fingers. It was imperfect, clouded sight, but it was absolutely not the complete, irreversible darkness they had been assured of. The revelation was abruptly terminated when Mrs. Benedetti rushed into the room, rigid with panic, clutching the overdue dose of medication. Elena instantly reverted to her domestic facade, but her mind was now a frantic vortex of implications. If Isabella possessed even vestigial sight, why the absolute consensus of total blindness? And why did this minimal visual responsiveness vanish so completely after the child received her prescribed medicine? That night, Elena lay rigid in the dark, connecting the horrifying pieces of the puzzle. The sharp chemical odor, the child's escalating stupor, Dr. Castellano's clinical detachment, and the suspicious extra dose before his examinations. Mrs. Benedetti's ritualistic care over the 3 unlabeled vials, the clandestine ritual of mixing medications, the meticulous calculation of their timing, was engineered solely to guarantee that Isabella remained profoundly sedated precisely when any medical expert might evaluate her condition. Someone was actively suppressing Isabella's ability to see, blinding her by design. But who possessed the monstrous capacity to inflict such cruelty upon a defenseless child? And, more importantly, what was the motive driving this calculated destruction? Elena's initial suspicion fell squarely upon Dr. Castellano himself. Perhaps he was exploiting his privileged access, conducting unauthorized pharmaceutical trials, using the innocent girl as a test subject for experimental drugs. The consistency of the monthly visits, the obsessive detail in the documentation, and the sheer complexity of the drug regimen all screamed research rather than treatment. Yet, that theory instantly raised terrifying questions about Vincenzo's possible complicity. Surely, a protective father, notorious for his ruthless loyalty, would never knowingly permit his daughter to be reduced to a laboratory specimen, unless Elena realized with a chilling certainty that swept through her entire being, Vincenzo himself had been profoundly deceived. What if the most feared man in the entire city was being manipulated regarding the health of his own child? What if a trusted individual had convinced him that Isabella's alleged blindness required this aggressive treatment, when the true objective was the maintenance of a sophisticated, years-long illusion? But to what possible end would anyone want to keep a wealthy, protected child blind? Elena mentally catalogued a dreadful list of possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Perhaps it was preparation for a future kidnapping, rendering her unable to identify her captors. Maybe perpetual dependence and helplessness fulfilled some deep, sick psychological need. Or, worst of all, perhaps her engineered disability was somehow intrinsically tied to Vincenzo's shadowy criminal enterprises, a connection Elena could not even begin to fathom. Elena understood she needed undeniable proof before risking an appeal to Vincenzo. Accusing his deeply trusted family doctor of deliberately poisoning Isabella without rock-solid evidence would not only ensure her immediate, ignominious dismissal but potentially something far worse. She had internalized enough of the staff's hushed, nervous gossip to grasp that individuals who crossed the powerful Moretti family had a tendency to simply disappear. Her chance arrived the following week, a precarious window opened by fate when Mrs. Benedetti, the head housekeeper, succumbed to a severe bout of food poisoning. The elderly woman was confined to her bed for 2 agonizing days, rendering her incapable of supervising the daily routines. While Vincenzo hired temporary staff for general household management, Elena immediately volunteered to take full, personal responsibility for administering Isabella's medication. For the first time since her arrival, she held unsupervised, direct access to the mysterious vials that dictated Isabella's daily reality. Elena meticulously examined each container. She noted the official manufacturer labels, the precise lot numbers, and the expiration dates. 2 of the medications bore standard, verifiable pharmaceutical markings from well-known, reputable companies. But the 3rd vial was an immediate, glaring anomaly. It lacked any official brand identification whatsoever, bearing only a rough, handwritten label scrawled with chemical abbreviations Elena did not recognize. This unmarked vial contained the opaque, milk-white substance that formed the potent base of Isabella's daily cocktail. With extreme caution, Elena extracted a small, precious sample. Sealing it securely inside an empty vitamin bottle, she stealthily smuggled out of the heavily guarded mansion in her purse. Analyzing the substance would necessitate professional contacts she didn't possess and resources she couldn't afford. But she was resolved. She would find a way. More critically, Elena decided to conduct her own immediate experiment. Instead of the full, meticulously prescribed dose, she gave Isabella only the 2 legitimate, professionally labeled medications, omitting the mysterious 3rd component entirely. If her suspicions held true, Isabella should exhibit increased alertness and measurable visual responses within a matter of hours. The outcome dramatically surpassed Elena's most daring hopes. By late afternoon, Isabella was profoundly more animated than Elena had ever witnessed. She began responding to visual cues with astonishing consistency, diligently tracking movements and reacting visibly to the simple changes in ambient lighting. Her verbalizations became distinctly clearer. Her physical coordination improved, and for brief, precious moments, she resembled a completely normal, vibrant 4-year-old child. But Elena's triumph was heartbreakingly brief. When Vincenzo returned home that evening for their usual father-daughter hour, his reaction to Isabella's sudden, miraculous improvement was one of immediate, sharp alarm rather than fatherly joy. "What is different about her today?" he demanded, his gaze intensely scrutinizing his daughter's unusually bright, expressive face. "She seems agitated, almost hyperactive. Did something unusual occur during her therapy session?" Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she desperately struggled to construct innocent, plausible explanations for Isabella's newfound responsiveness. She cited the unavoidable delay in the medication schedule due to Mrs. Benedetti's illness, suggesting that this might account for the minor fluctuations in Isabella's behavioral patterns. Vincenzo's concern deepened into tangible distress. He immediately contacted Dr. Castellano, detailing Isabella's altered state and demanding an emergency consultation. The doctor arrived within the hour, his typically aloof composure entirely replaced by an unmistakable anxiety upon observing Isabella's exceptional alertness. This level of neurological stimulation is profoundly unhealthy for her delicate nervous system, Dr. Castellano declared gravely to Vincenzo after a brief, thorough examination of the child. A patient in Isabella's specific condition can suffer dangerous overstimulation if their precise medication schedule is disrupted. We must restore her proper dosage immediately. Elena watched in mounting horror as Dr. Castellano professionally prepared an emergency injection, glibly asserting that Isabella required immediate sedation to preempt potential seizures or irreversible neurological damage. The child, who had been laughing and reaching happily for her toys mere minutes earlier, became utterly limp and unresponsive within seconds of receiving the shot. Her condition is far more fragile than we initially grasped, Dr. Castellano lectured Vincenzo as they both observed Isabella's now motionless form. Any deviation whatsoever from her prescribed treatment could result in permanent brain damage or, tragically, death. I urgently recommend we increase her daily dosages to ensure we prevent any future episodes like this one." Vincenzo nodded, his face severely etched with profound guilt and palpable fear. "Do whatever is necessary to protect her," he commanded, his voice raw. "I do not care about the cost." Elena managed to maintain a facade of professional composure throughout the agonizing crisis, but internally, she was screaming a silent protest. Dr. Castellano had just smoothly convinced Vincenzo that Isabella's miraculous, genuine improvement was, in fact, a life-threatening emergency requiring harsher, more aggressive treatment. The manipulation was executed with such professional ease, presented with such impeccable medical authority, that even Elena briefly began to second-guess her own observations. But that flicker of doubt instantly evaporated when she caught Dr. Castellano's true expression during a moment he believed himself unobserved. As he prepared to depart the mansion, his carefully crafted mask of medical concern completely slipped. The expression of cold, calculated cruelty in his eyes revealed a man who harbored zero compassion for his young patient. Only naked satisfaction at having successfully maintained a deeply sinister deception. Elena realized she was witnessing something far more menacing than mere medical malpractice. This was a deliberate, continuous conspiracy, meticulously designed and executed to maintain Isabella in a state of artificial disability. The sheer scope of the deception suggested involvement that extended far beyond one corrupt family doctor. Someone with substantial resources, power, and long-term planning had orchestrated this entire situation. The question that chilled Elena to the core was devastatingly simple. If they were willing to chemically drug a young child for years just to preserve this illusion, what unspeakable lengths would they go to silence the one person who threatened to expose them? Over the subsequent days, Elena noticed a significant increase in the scrutiny of her every action. Mrs. Benedetti, now fully recovered from her illness, seemed to watch Elena with a newly acquired intensity during the preparation of Isabella's medicine. Security cameras that had previously been aimed at general hallways were subtly readjusted to focus more directly on Isabella's private wing of the mansion. Most unnerving of all, Elena began receiving subtle, oblique warnings from several of the veteran staff members. The head groundskeeper casually mentioned that the previous nanny had departed the service very abruptly after she had started asking too many specific questions about Isabella's strange medical regimen. The cook shared a tense story about a past housekeeper who had been instantly fired immediately after expressing any concern about the family's sensitive medical arrangements. The unspoken message was terrifyingly clear. Elena's increasing curiosity had been duly noted, and her position was rapidly becoming perilous. But knowing the profound, awful truth about Isabella's condition made staying silent utterly impossible. Somewhere within the fortified walls of this mansion of secrets lived a small girl who had been systematically robbed of her sight and her future by the very people she was entrusted to trust completely. Elena knew she was rapidly running out of time. Soon, Dr. Castellano would return for his scheduled monthly visit, likely armed with new, aggressive instructions to increase Isabella's dosages even further. Every single day of delay meant another day of unnecessary suffering and chemical imprisonment for an innocent child. Yet, confronting Vincenzo directly remained an impossibly dangerous prospect. How could she possibly convince the city's most powerful criminal figure that his trusted, loyal family doctor was methodically poisoning his own daughter? And even if she successfully managed to expose the terrible truth, what ironclad guarantee did she have that Vincenzo wouldn't simply eliminate everyone involved in the toxic drama, including Elena herself, to ensure the secret died forever? The answer arrived from a completely unexpected source. While painstakingly organizing Isabella's extensive medical files, Elena discovered documentation dating back to the child's earliest treatments. Hidden deep among the countless routine examination reports was a single, brittle page that stood apart. It was an independent assessment conducted by a specialist who had examined Isabella during her very first month of life. The report was devastating in its stark implications. According to this crucial, long-forgotten evaluation, Isabella showed clear, definitive evidence of functional vision during that initial examination. Her pupils responded normally to light, her eyes tracked movement reliably, and her neurological responses were recorded as completely normal for a newborn infant. Someone had deliberately buried this critical report beneath years of fabricated medical records, but astonishingly, they hadn't destroyed it entirely. Elena now held incontrovertible proof that Isabella had been born with perfect sight, and that her current, tragic blindness was entirely artificial and chemically induced. Armed with this evidence, and fueled by a righteous, incandescent fury, Elena prepared to take the most dangerous gamble of her entire life. She would confront Vincenzo with the absolute truth about his daughter's stolen condition, fully cognizant that her revelation would either succeed in saving Isabella or result in Elena's own swift, brutal destruction. The confrontation was set for the following evening, during Vincenzo's customary nightly visit with Isabella. Elena planned to present her evidence, carefully explain her shocking discoveries, and trust that a father's deep, primal love for his child would ultimately overcome any ingrained loyalty to the powerful people's secretive mixing ritual. The precise timing of the doses expertly calibrated to ensure Isabella remained heavily sedated and cognitively muted whenever professional medical eyes were cast upon her. Someone was deliberately, systematically, eclipsing Isabella's vision. But who possessed the monstrous motive to harm an innocent child in such a calculated way? And far more crucially, what was the endgame? Elena's initial suspicion settled heavy on Dr. Castellano himself. Could he be utilizing the child for clandestine, unauthorized experiments, employing her as a human subject to test novel or dangerously potent pharmacological compounds? The monthly checkups, the obsessive, detailed documentation, and the bewilderingly complex cocktail of drugs certainly leaned toward obsessive research rather than curative treatment. But that theory introduced a terrifying complexity regarding Vincenzo's involvement. Surely the fiercely protective father would never knowingly condemn his only daughter to be a laboratory specimen, unless Vincenzo simply didn't know. That possibility, that the feared crime boss of the entire city was himself a victim of elaborate medical deception regarding his daughter's condition, sent an icy wave of shock through Elena's entire body. What if a powerful, hidden enemy had convinced him that Isabella's supposed blindness required this aggressive, continuous treatment, when the true purpose was the maintenance of a fabricated illusion? But what twisted outcome necessitated keeping a powerful man's daughter blind? Elena considered a grim inventory of possible motives, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Perhaps it was preparation for a future kidnapping, ensuring Isabella could never identify her abductors. Maybe her perpetual dependency and helplessness served some dark, perverse psychological satisfaction for the conspirators. Or, worst of all, maybe her engineered blindness was a crucial tether, a vulnerability directly connected to Vincenzo's vast, dark criminal activities in ways Elena dared not even try to imagine. Elena knew she needed ironclad proof before daring to approach Vincenzo with such explosive suspicions. To accuse his trusted family doctor of deliberately poisoning his child without unshakable evidence would likely not only result in her immediate, irreversible dismissal but possibly something far more permanent. She had gathered enough fear-filled whispers among the staff to understand that people who truly crossed the Moretti family often simply and permanently vanished from the city's memory. Her window of opportunity appeared the following week when Mrs. Benedetti was suddenly struck down by a debilitating case of severe food poisoning. The older woman remained bedridden for 2 full days, completely unable to oversee her demanding household duties. Vincenzo immediately arranged for interim management, but Elena quickly volunteered to personally handle Isabella's highly sensitive medication routine. For the first time since her arrival, she had unfettered, unsupervised access to the mysterious, guarded vials that dictated Isabella's daily, chemically altered existence. Elena meticulously studied each container, noting the pharmaceutical manufacturer labels, the precise lot numbers, and the expiration dates. 2 of the compounds bore standard, recognizable markings from highly reputable pharmaceutical houses. But the 3rd vial was chillingly different. It carried absolutely no brand identification, only a hastily handwritten label scrawled with unfamiliar chemical abbreviations that Elena couldn't place. That unlabeled vial contained the milky white substance, opaque and slightly viscous, that formed the heavy base of Isabella's daily narcotic cocktail. Elena carefully extracted a minute sample. Sealing the few precious drops inside an empty vitamin bottle, she stealthily smuggled out of the mansion premises, tucked deep in her purse. Getting the unknown substance analyzed would require sophisticated contacts she didn't possess and funding she couldn't possibly afford. But she swore she would find a way. More urgently, Elena decided to conduct her own immediate, terrifying experiment. Instead of administering the full prescribed dose, she gave Isabella only the 2 legitimate, recognizable medications, completely omitting the mysterious third component. If her grim suspicions were correct, Isabella should exhibit dramatically increased alertness and visible visual responsiveness within mere hours. The results obliterated Elena's wildest, most optimistic hopes. By mid-afternoon, Isabella was a completely different child, more animated, focused, and vibrant than Elena had ever witnessed. She began responding to visual cues with astonishing consistency, accurately tracking movement across the room and reacting to changes in lighting with natural curiosity. Her rudimentary speech became clearer and more articulate. Her coordination improved markedly, and for breathtaking brief moments, she behaved exactly like a completely normal, curious 4-year-old child. But Elena's triumph was heartbreakingly short-lived. When Vincenzo returned home that evening for their usual sacrosanct father-daughter time, his reaction to Isabella's newfound animation was immediate, sharp alarm rather than joyful relief. "What is different about her today?" he demanded. His eyes narrowed, studying his daughter's unusually bright, expressive face. "She seems agitated, almost unnaturally hyperactive. Did something happen during her therapy session?" Elena's heart hammered painfully against her ribs as she struggled to quickly fabricate innocent explanations for Isabella's miraculous responsiveness. She cited the unavoidable delay in the medication schedule due to Mrs. Benedetti's illness, carefully suggesting that the minor timing variance might account for a slight shift in Isabella's behavioral patterns. Vincenzo's concern, however, only deepened, morphing instantly into suspicion. He immediately contacted Dr. Castellano, describing Isabella's highly stimulated state and urgently requesting an emergency consultation. The doctor arrived at the mansion within the hour, his usual perfectly composed demeanor shattered, replaced by palpable anxiety when he observed Isabella's unnerving alertness. This level of stimulation is actively unhealthy for her delicate nervous system, Dr. Castellano declared gravely to Vincenzo after an overly thorough examination of the child. Children with her specific condition can experience extremely dangerous overstimulation if their complex medication schedule is disrupted, even slightly. We must restore her proper sedative dosage immediately. Elena watched in mounting horror as Dr. Castellano swiftly prepared an emergency injection, smoothly explaining that Isabella required immediate, deep sedation to prevent potential seizures or catastrophic neurological damage. The child, who had been laughing and playfully reaching for her favorite stuffed toys just minutes earlier, went instantly limp and unresponsive within seconds of receiving the powerful shot. "Her condition is far more fragile than we initially grasped," Dr. Castellano told Vincenzo somberly as they observed Isabella's now motionless form, lying passive on her bed. "Any deviation from her rigorously prescribed treatment could result in permanent brain damage or even death. I strongly recommend we increase her daily maintenance dosages to prevent any future dangerous episodes like this one." Vincenzo nodded grimly, his face etched with agonizing guilt and paralyzing fear. "Do whatever is necessary to protect her," he rasped. "I don't care about the cost, Dr. Castellano." Elena somehow managed to maintain her professional composure throughout the entire sickening crisis, but internally, she was screaming a silent, desperate protest. Dr. Castellano had just expertly convinced Vincenzo that Isabella's miraculous improvement was, in fact, a life-threatening medical emergency demanding even more aggressive chemical treatment. The manipulation was executed with such professional smoothness, presented with such medical authority, that even Elena momentarily questioned her own sanity. But that lingering doubt evaporated entirely when she caught Dr. Castellano's expression during a single unguarded moment. As he prepared to leave the mansion, believing himself to be completely unobserved, his mask of medical concern slipped away entirely. The cold, calculating satisfaction in his eyes was nakedly apparent, revealing someone who felt absolutely no compassion for his young, suffering patient. only smug triumph at successfully maintaining his elaborate deception. Elena realized she was witnessing something exponentially more sinister than mere medical malpractice. This was a deliberate, sophisticated, ongoing conspiracy orchestrated to perpetually keep Isabella in a state of artificial disability. But the sheer scope and complexity of the deception suggested involvement extending far beyond just one corrupt, ambitious doctor. Someone with substantial resources, significant power, and long-term foresight had meticulously orchestrated this entire tragic situation. The terrifying question that now chilled Elena to the marrow was agonizingly simple. If they were willing to drug and suppress a child's mind and body for years to sustain this illusion, what terrible final measure would they take against anyone who dared to expose them? Over the following days, Elena noticed a significant, escalating scrutiny of her activities. Mrs. Benedetti, fully recovered from her illness, now seemed to watch Elena with unnerving vigilance during the preparation of Isabella's medications. Security cameras that had previously monitored general corridors were subtly adjusted, their lenses focusing more directly and persistently on Isabella's private wing of the mansion. Most disturbing of all, Elena began receiving subtle, unspoken warnings from other long-term staff members. The head groundskeeper mentioned casually during an afternoon chat that the previous nanny had left very suddenly, after making the mistake of asking too many detailed questions about Isabella's treatment regimen. The cook shared a chilling, offhand anecdote about a housekeeper who had been instantly dismissed right after expressing concerns about the family's secretive medical arrangements. The message was delivered with surgical clarity. Elena's growing curiosity had been decisively noted, and her position was rapidly becoming perilous. But knowing the absolute, horrific truth about Isabella's condition made the prospect of staying silent impossible, a moral wound she could not bear. Hidden somewhere within this mansion of staggering wealth and dark secrets lived a little girl who had been systematically robbed of her sight and her future by the very people she was taught to trust implicitly. Elena understood she was rapidly running out of time. Dr. Castellano would soon return for his scheduled monthly visit, possibly armed with new, darker instructions to increase Isabella's dosages even further, tightening her chemical prison. Every day of delay meant another day of unnecessary suffering for an innocent child. But confronting Vincenzo directly remained impossibly dangerous. How could she possibly convince the city's most powerful, paranoid criminal overlord that his trusted, lifelong family doctor was systematically poisoning his own daughter? And even if she succeeded in exposing the truth, what concrete guarantee did she have that Vincenzo wouldn't simply eliminate everyone involved in the mess, including Elena herself, to bury the entire shameful episode? The answer arrived from a totally unexpected source. While painstakingly organizing Isabella's haphazard medical files, Elena discovered documentation from the child's earliest treatments. Tucked deep beneath the mountain of routine, fabricated examination reports was a single, separate page that conspicuously did not match the others. It was an independent assessment conducted by a highly respected specialist who had examined Isabella during her first crucial month of life. The report was devastating in its implications. According to this forgotten, meticulously buried evaluation, Isabella showed clear, functional evidence of normal vision during her initial examination. Her pupils responded perfectly to light, her eyes tracked movement reliably, and her neurological responses were completely normal and healthy for a newborn child. Someone with motive and power, had deliberately buried this definitive report beneath years of falsified medical records, but they had not completely destroyed it. Elena now held the smoking gun. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that Isabella had been born with perfect sight, and that her current debilitating blindness was entirely artificial and chemically induced. Armed with this evidence, and fueled by a righteous, incandescent fury, Elena prepared to take the most dangerous, final gamble of her entire life. She would confront Vincenzo Moretti with the complete, terrifying truth about his daughter's condition, knowing her revelation would either irrevocably save Isabella or result in Elena's own swift, brutal destruction. The confrontation would happen tomorrow night, during Vincenzo's intimate evening visit with Isabella. Elena would present her evidence, explain her horrific discoveries, and rely solely on the desperate hope that a father's primal love for his child would ultimately overcome any deep-seated loyalty to the betrayers who had deceived him for years. But first, she needed to mentally prepare for every conceivable outcome, because once she spoke the truth aloud, there would be no possibility of turning back, and the monumental consequences would reshape the entire Moretti family forever. The next evening, Elena found Vincenzo seated in Isabella's room, his deep voice reading their nightly story. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she pulled out the hidden, damning medical report. Her voice was barely steady, strained with the weight of the words that would instantly change everything. "Mr. Moretti, your daughter was never blind." The storybook slipped from his grip and fell silently to the carpet. The silence that stretched between them was immediate and absolute, thick like a held breath before a catastrophic storm. Then Elena showed him the physical evidence, explained the nature of the medications, and described exactly what she had witnessed when the sedative drugs were delayed. Vincenzo's face transformed in stages, through shocked disbelief, agonizing comprehension, mounting rage, and finally, an icy fury so cold and concentrated it felt capable of freezing blood solid. Dr. Castellano had maliciously stolen 4 precious years of his daughter's life. For years of imposed darkness, enforced by potent chemicals and meticulously layered lies. Within mere hours, the corrupt doctor vanished completely from the face of the earth, leaving no trace behind. The mansion's entire medical staff was replaced overnight, purged and scrubbed clean. And Isabella, slowly and carefully weaned from the debilitating substances that had imprisoned her mind and dulled her senses, began to see the world, the beautiful, vivid world her father had always unknowingly dreamed of showing her. Elena became far more than just a caretaker that day. She became the woman who gifted a ruthless mafia boss back his daughter's sight, and in return, found a fierce, loyal family she never knew she desperately needed. Sometimes the most powerful, unreachable people in the world are ultimately brought to their knees by the simplest, most undeniable truth. And sometimes it takes someone with absolutely nothing left to lose to save someone who, outwardly, appears to have everything.